I finally did it. I gave in to all of the hype and I knit a ranunculus. So let's talk about it. Hey Nerdy Knitter, Tanya here. I'm a certified knitting instructor and a master hand knitter, and the goal here at Nerdy Knitting is to help you knit garments that fit. We're going to talk specifically about the ranunculus today and what I did to modify it and make it fit my body the way I wanted it to, and what changes I would make if I were going to knit it again. Now, I had no intentions to actually ever knit this pattern. When I first saw it pop up, I really didn't like the fit. And now I understand like the designer had a specific idea in mind for the fit, but for me, I don't love super oversized sweaters on my body and I didn't like the way it looked, so I just ignored it. But it kept popping up and goodness, like it seemed like everybody was knitting one of these, and I was working at a local yarn shop at the time and one of the knitters there was working on it as well. She had some questions and struggles, so I was looking at the pattern, her copy of the pattern, so I could help her with that. And then I ended up purchasing a copy for myself just as a reference. I had no plan to ever knit it, but because I was helping her in this class and I wanted to see what all the hype was about, like what was so great about this pattern that everybody loved. And then I still didn't knit it for quite a while. And then last October or so, I have a small membership group. I'll put a link for that down below. And we do a knit along every quarter. And the theme for that quarter was the ranunculus. A lot of the members had knit them in the past and some of them wanted to knit another one. So I figured, okay, I've got the pattern already. I have some yarn that I had decided I had bought for another sweater and decided not to knit that one. So I'm like, well, I'll just use that to knit a ranunculus. So cast one on and knit one for myself, and now it is all finished. And we're going to talk about what I did to modify it to fit me, and then even some things that didn't quite work out. I had a couple of things that didn't work out and I had to redo. What I would do if I might actually knit one in the future. I was thinking like a short sleeve, very loose gauge, the original gauge, for summer perhaps, but we'll see about that. But let's talk about this one in particular. So first of all, we'll talk about the yarn. This is my last skein. I've got a little bit and a whole skein left of Galileo from Knit Picks. This is a sport weight yarn. And the pattern does tell you can use any yarn weight, and then as long as you get like the gauge that's in the pattern. Makes me wonder about yardage though, because yardage is going to change depending on the yarn weight, I would assume, but I don't know. But anyway, so this yarn is a blend of 50% merino wool, 50% viscose from bamboo. It's very soft and it does have a little bit of a fuzz to it. And it's very shiny. I accidentally thought this was a blend of wool and silk. There is another yarn, I can't recall which one it is, from Knit Picks that I like as well. That's a wool and silk blend. And I thought this was it because of that shine, this little sheen that it has. But then I read it, I was like, oh yeah, no, this is the one that has bamboo. But it's very similar to sort of that silk. It kind of has that same kind of smooth feel to it. Really nice yarn, nice for this sweater. I think it's soft and it's lovely. We'll go on to the changes. I've got my notes here so I can remember everything because I made lots of changes. I keep like little scraps of paper that I wrote things down on as I was going. First thing was the gauge. I was not interested in like this super oversized open sweater. I wanted something that I could just wear as a sweater without having to wear like something underneath it. But I also didn't swatch. I figured everybody is starting with the same stitch count and casting on, so I can knit the yoke and then you take my gauge from that and decide what I want to do with the rest. So I broke one of my rules right there. And now that I've worn it, I do think it's still slightly too loose for me. So I do have like a camisole underneath because it is a little bit on the sheer side, not totally sheer, but like with a bright light shining at me, like I can kind of see through things. So I do have a camisole underneath. That's one of the things I probably would change. I might go down another needle size to get like a less opaque fabric, but I do like the drape of the needle size I use. So I use the sport weight yarn, size US 5 needle for the sweater. And then, I don't know, US 3 maybe for like the trim everywhere. But speaking of the gauge, so the designer has you cast on a certain number of stitches knowing you're going to have this very loose and drapey open fabric, no matter what kind of yarn weight you're using. And I didn't want that. I wanted something, that I could wear without having that loose feel to it or loose look as well. So I knew that my gauge was probably going to be closer to double what the pattern is. I think the pattern is 3 stitches to the inch, and I knew I wanted more like 5.5, 6 stitches to the inch. So I decided to just assume if that's the case, I wanted to double it, then I was going to double my stitch count. So when I cast on, I doubled the original stitch count, but I didn't cast on like with the neckline and do the neckline first. I decided to start right before the stitch pattern that's on here. So I can't remember if like the original pattern has you do the neckline and then yes, some short rows and all of that, and then maybe an increase round. So you get to like that stitch count that you have just before you do the stitch pattern. So I started at that point. I read through the pattern, got to that point where I knew what the stitch count was just before this. And then I looked at the stitches in there to make sure that if I just doubled the stitch count, would it work with that stitch pattern? And it did. So I was okay with that. So that way I knew I would still get sort of like the same neck opening, but I could have a tighter gauge. So that is exactly what I did. I started with a provisional cast on the stitch count that's just before the stitches, but I doubled it for myself, knowing that I was going to come back later on and take those provisional stitches, do my short rows in this direction, and then finish my neckline later on. When I'm doing a yoke sweater, that's kind of my preference. I like to finish the bulk of the sweater and then come back and do the neckline and get the neckline just the way I want it. If you start with the neckline, you can't really come back and change things, or well, I suppose you could rip it out, but it's a little more work. So I like to keep that provisional cast on and do all of that afterwards. So I cast on with that provisional, double my stitch count. So I did all of the yoke, then I stopped, I washed and blocked it, and then I took my measurements from that, and I liked how it looked. I liked the way I kind of plopped it over my head and tried it on, and I liked the way that looked. So I decided just to keep going ahead with the US 5 needles that I was using. And I think now if I had to do it again, I would probably go down a US 4 after the yoke, just to make the fabric a little slightly more dense. I think it would still have a good drape like it does. It's got a really nice open sort of drape to it. But maybe just go down one needle size just to make sure like the fabric is not sheer at all. Like it's not, but I do notice like if I'm in very bright light, like I have this light turned down that's facing me, but when it's very bright, I can kind of see, almost kind of see through things, I think, but I'm not going to be like in super bright light like this, but still, maybe if I had to do it again, I would go down that one needle size and see how that would look. So once I had finished the yoke and I had washed and blocked, what I actually did was I measured myself. The one issue I always have with a circular yoke sweater is the fit around my bust. Because you're just knitting like a big circle basically and you plop it over your head. If you have a larger bust, then, I mean, if you look at my back, it's kind of flat, but I've got, you know, this going on in the front. If I knit a regular circular yoke sweater, and I have in the past, my first one, and then divide it in half exactly front and back for the body, and you know, got the two sleeves, what I end up with is like extra fabric in the back. And I don't have that in this one because I took some of that extra fabric and put it in the front where I actually need it. So that is not a huge hard process. Like you just have to know your stitch counts. And of course, because I doubled the stitch counts, mine were totally different from the pattern at this point. But I kind of knew. I took the stitch counts again approximately for each of like the sleeves, and I figured out the sleeves first, like how many stitches I would need there and how many stitches I wanted total for the body. But then I measured like just across the front of my bust and subtracted that from that total full bust measurement, and that the difference between the two is how much more fabric I'm going to need across the front. So I took that number of inches, multiplied that by my stitches to the inch, and I knew that is the number of extra stitches I wanted in the front to make sure I didn't have like all of this excess fabric in the back, but I had it where I need it in the front of my sweater. So of course I had to make that decision before placing those raglan markers, because once those are in place, that's where everything is going to be divided for the body. So I had to make sure once the yoke was finished, before I did the raglan shaping, I had to figure out, okay, how many stitches for each sleeve, how many stitches for the front, taking some from the back, and it's a bit of math, and then I just use markers. I mark it all out with markers first, and then I know exactly what I have to do, and I can continue on with the shaping. So that was my first modification, was just moving some stitches from the back to the front for my full bust, and that is like my favorite thing to do when it comes to a circular yoke sweater. It's very simple to do that process. I mean, it's a very little bit of math, you know, full bust measurement, subtract out the front bust. That The difference between those two numbers is the number of inches that you need to take from the back and put in the front, just to make sure you're getting enough fabric where you need it. So not a hard process. That was the first thing that I changed. Well, I guess I changed everything. The stitch count, the gauge, I started with a provisional cast on, but the first like modification to the actual body of the sweater was that. Then I did the raglan shaping, separated body and sleeves. I knit a little bit of the body, and then I was trying to decide if I wanted to do any sort of waist shaping or anything like that. I decided against it because I wanted something that was a bit longer and kind of loose and flowing. I could wear it with some leggings or jeggings or something like that. So a bit on the longer side. So I figured I was just going to skip the waist shaping because like the bamboo also in this gives it like this really fluid drapiness to it. So I didn't think I really needed to add the waist shaping as well, because the drape of the fiber sort of helps shift it to fit your body too. So I decided against waist shaping, so straight tube to the bottom, but I did stop for a while and I worked on the sleeves. I finished like a skein of yarn for the body, so I was like, about here on the body, and I just left that and I went back to do the sleeves next, I believe was my next step, or one sleeve. And I decided I was going to do the balloon sleeves. I wanted just something very simple. So I did the balloon sleeve and then I tried it on again. And I must have had more of the body done by that point because I did not like the combination of no body shaping plus the extra balloon sleeve fabric. Too much fabric in the body and in the sleeves for me, my personal taste, I don't love. I feel like one of them has to sort of be a little slimmer. So because I hadn't done any waist shaping, it was like a lot of fabric in the body plus a lot of fabric in the sleeve, and it felt like just too much for me. I'm on the short side, so I don't like super large prints or like a long dress that's like lots of florals. It's just too much because, I mean, I'm a larger person, but I'm short, so it kind of feels overpowering. And I feel the same with too much fabric. So for me, it's like one or the other. If I've got like a looser body, the sleeve has to be more fitted. So I had finished one whole sleeve and decided I did not like it. So I pulled it back to about here-ish, I think. Yes, that's why I went about that far. And then I did just a standard tapered sleeve. I just, took from that point, measured my arm down, how much do I have left to do, knowing I wanted a cuff and a little bit of the design there. And then I just did a regular tapered sleeve just to take out some of that excess fabric so it didn't feel like it was too much fabric. And that's totally personal choice for everybody. So, but that was my choice. Like I don't like to have a lot of fabric in the sleeve and in the body. I feel like if I have a balloon sleeve, I either want a cropped body or more sort of a slimmer fit through the body. So it's not like fabric everywhere. But I mean, that's just personal choice for myself. So about that time too, and when I'm working on a sweater, I find I get maybe a little bit bored, especially when it's a lot of plain stockinette. So I will swap out what I'm working on. So at that point, I stopped and figured, oh, I'm gonna go back and do the neckline. So I just went back to that provisional cast on, put the stitches back on, well, they were already on a needle. I just left them on a circular needle cord, popped the needle tips in there. I did my short row neckline shaping going up and then finished with some twisted rib and looked good, left it, thought it was done, went back and finished my sleeve, did a little more on the body, washed and blocked again to check the fit. And I do that a lot when I knit a sweater like this. I don't just wait till the end. I stop and try it on and see how things are, make sure the sleeve is the right length before I knit the next one, things like that. And at that point I thought, oh, the neckline, it's a little more open than I thought. And I think it's actually the weight of the sweater because I knit it, I mean, it's a large sweater, plus it's quite long. It's like tunic length-ish. It does go like below my bum when I'm wearing leggings, so it's on the long side. So I think the extra weight of it pulled the neckline down. And actually, I think it pulled this down too, because my armhole was not as deep as it is now when I had washed it and tried it on when I only had part of the body. So I think the weight of the whole sweater has pulled it down. I don't hate it. It's a little more loose than I like in this part. I would like it a little bit closer, but that is my own issue for not doing a gauge swatch and then checking to see if it was going to like pull it down. And I should have known that, knowing the size and the length of this, that it was probably going to add some extra weight and pull this part down. So it's a little more oversized here than I love. But the neckline, ooh, did not like that. Like it was really, it was like out to here, like up to my bra straps, really, really open. Did not like that at all. So that was another thing I made a note to myself. I'm going to have to take out the neckline, and I had done a sewn bind off. I don't know if you've ever tried to pick out a sewn bind off. It's not fun. So I knew I would be cutting the neckline off and then ripping it back to that provisional cast on and redoing this. And I did that. At what point did I do that? I think maybe I finished both sleeves first. I had already done one sleeve and I hadn't done the other. When I had washed and blocked and tried it on, didn't like the neckline, so knew I was going to take it out. But I think I did the other sleeve first. So I had both of my sleeves done, and the body, I think I'd finished the body at that point too. So sleeves, I did add, so I changed the sleeves, not balloon sleeves anymore, obviously. I did, you can see the decrease line right there. Like I did the standard decreases to get like a tapered shape on my sleeve, and then on the bottom down here, I did some of the stitch pattern. I repeated it. I did the same at the hem, the same exact things. I can't remember exactly which sections I did. The stitches where you like are pulling up the loops, I did that section, and then the slip stitch section I did as well. So I just did that along the cuff and a twisted rib hem, and then a sewn bind off for both of the cuffs. So standard sleeves with a little bit of extra there. Give me something to look forward to at the end instead of just plain stockinette. And I think the body I had pretty much finished, or did I finish? Yes, I think I did. I went back and I finished the length of the body and added the same kind of a detail down at the hem here as I did at the wrist, and the twisted rib, not a sewn bind off there. I didn't want to do a sewn bind off around the hem. That's a lot of stitches. So I just did like a bind off in pattern, I think. Yeah, that's what that is. Nobody's going to be looking at that too closely. So then my last big step was to come back and fix this. So that was quite a chore. I knew I was not going to try to pick out a sewn bind off because that, it's like one stitch at a time and not fun. So I ended up cutting. I cut like right in the twisted rib, cut it all off like in that area. Not the whole twisted rib, like sort of in the middle of it. So I could cut the cast on it or the bind off edge off. Then I had to pick and pick and pick all the little bits out of that until I could find the actual length of yarn that wasn't cut anymore. Then I pulled that all back to the provisional cast on. And after it's been washed, I mean, because this is mostly wool or half wool, it's going to hold its shape. So the stitches are just kind of like laying there. They weren't slipping. I did lose a few, but I was able to ladder them back up quite easily. I had to be very careful though, because it was right along. I hadn't done anything like I had on the front. I had the stitch pattern, and then there's that provisional cast on, and I did my short rows right away, and then my neckline, so I didn't have any extra right here. So I had to be really careful when I got to this point on the front, because I didn't want to lose any of that stitch pattern, and that would have been a total mess to try to fix, because of course that's knit in this direction, and I was knitting in this direction. But everything worked out. I pulled it back to the provisional, put that on another cord, a smaller size, just to make sure everything was on there and everything was sitting right, and I picked up those drop stitches, counted my stitches to make sure I hadn't lost any, and then at that point I added about an inch or so of just stockinette, just to kind of bring it up a little bit more. And then I did a decrease round. I think like I knit 4 and then knit 2 together, more or less all the way around. So I got rid of like 30 stitches, I think, just to pull it in a little bit more. Then I did my short row shaping, and then I finished with my twisted neckline, and that brought it up quite a lot. I didn't want a crew neck, but I didn't want it like super open like it was. So I'm happy with this type of neck. This is probably one of my preferred necklines. I don't like anything like up, definitely not here on the front of my neck. I don't like anything up super high. And I think with like the oversized fit, like this neckline suits it. So that's pretty much everything I did. So this is going to be a short video this week, but that is like all of the modifications. Nothing huge really besides the gauge. Like once I knew I was going to be knitting twice the number of stitches to the inch, that changed. I kind of had to chuck the numbers out at that point. I wasn't even following a particular size anymore because my numbers were completely different since I doubled the stitch count. But when you're just knitting 3 tubes, that wasn't such a big deal. And it was a fun pattern because like everybody starts with the same yoke, and then you divide things up depending on the size of the body and add the extra stitches for the raglan shaping to get the right body size. So it was very easy to customize at that point because the yoke is finished and you can literally just plop it over your head and kind of pin out how many stitches you need for each sleeve, knowing you're going to be adding more for when you do the raglan shaping. And then the same for the body, adjusting for the front bust. That was probably the biggest adjustment. Actually, the neckline was probably the biggest because I had to yank it out and do it all again. So that is a bit nerve-wracking when you have to like pull things out and you don't want to mess up a stitch pattern. But it worked out okay. I do think I will knit another one at some point. I am thinking it would be fun to just do like a summer, very loose gauge, short sleeve top. I'm not sure how open and oversized, well, open stitch pattern, yes, but the oversized, not so much. I would still want it a little more fitted, and this one is a little more oversized than I wanted when I originally thought about it, but I'm not going to pull it out and redo it. I like it. I like the fit. It looks nice with my leggings. It's comfy. I like the little bit of shine it has. But if I do ever knit one again with more of like a sport weight yarn, I would probably go down one more needle size depending on the yarn, just to make sure the fabric is not sort of at all see-through, because it is like a touch, just a touch, enough that I want to wear like a camisole underneath it. But it's comfy. I like it. It was a fun pattern. The yoke was fun. Once you get past that, it's pretty boring. It's just plain stockinette. For me, that's okay if I'm watching like a subtitled K-drama or Turkish drama. Then I'm so busy reading a screen that I just want to keep my hands busy, so stockinette's perfect in that situation. But it was easy enough to customize and I enjoyed it, and I probably will knit another one in the future. Perhaps. We will see. Or maybe I might just use the idea of it to come up with something for myself. But I do like the idea of just starting with, everybody starts with one yoke, which I think is interesting, and I see where it's coming from design-wise, because like there's not much variance in size here through the shoulders. So just making one big circle, and then like after the circle is done, you can fit the rest of the body from sort of like this point down, because there's not much of a difference in bodies from, like the neck to the shoulder tip. They're all pretty similar. There's some people that have broad shoulders and some who have more narrowed shoulders, but this area in general is about the same for all people. So this part of the sweater would kind of be the same for a lot of people. So it was an interesting pattern. So I can see partly why it's so popular. I still don't understand why it's always right at the top, but I guess people love it. But I'd love to hear from you. If this is a sweater that you have knit or not knit, or you never will knit, then leave a comment and tell me why you've knitted or why you've chosen not to knit it. I'd love to hear about that. And if you're interested in learning more about how I do these kind of modifications, I have a whole class that walks through knitting a top-down circular yoke or a top-down raglan and customizing it to fit your body. So I'll be sure to put a link for that down below as well in case you want to check that out. And that's it for this video. So I will see you in the next one.